Hello, everyone, and welcome to a non-stream for once. We're doing a quick follow-up here that we talked about during our Cope Not Hate stream on Monday, Wednesday, where we're going over some of the legal aspects of Hope Not Hate, and I've kind of subtitled this nominally like "How do they get away with it?" But it is also about like NGO lawfare and how they engage in ways that a lot of the kind of the general public and especially other organizations aren't really allowed to. I'm joined by Reactionary Reading Law. Do you want to say hello quickly and a load about who you are?
Hello, guys. I'm Reactionary Reading Law. I'm a law student, and I also write legal articles on legal and political strategy.
You can find him on Twitter at Reactionary Reading Law. I believe you've got is it a public speaking vertical?
Yeah, it's a public speaking locals where I tutor people for less money than I would charge privately. So it's £20 a month. So I tutor people on public speaking. There are videos there. When I get some subscribers, I'm going to have live streams where I coach people.
All right, that's quite a useful service. You're also on Substack. That's where your main kind of articles are. That's
Yeah.
reactionaryreadinglaw.substack.com. I'm also trialing this as an audio recording for our Substack. So if you're on YouTube, the links will be in the description. If you're on Substack, they will be kind of at the bottom of the post here with the kind of podcast recording. So I'm trying to make this do double duty, bit of experimenting here. But to quickly kind of getting to what we're doing here, we'll be doing some extra analysis of the Hope Not Hate report because the few things that you noticed, and then we'll be going
Yes.
into some of the kind of more general aspects. But what was the stuff from a legal perspective that really stuck out to you in this Hope Not Hate report? Then
The defamatory element, mainly. Also, you've got the fact that lots of people in the terrorism section are in that section for making stupid comments, mainly. You have a few people who actually tried to do something, but most of them, or did something, are in prison now because they made stupid comments. And this is getting onto something that I talk about a lot. It's not cucking not to say stupid things or say things that will get you put in prison. There's no sense in saying or using racial slurs because the only person who looks bad is you. And yes, you might be breaking a barrier or whatever, but quite frankly, it's not helpful because it makes everyone else look bad who's involved with you and also makes it likely that you're going to end up in prison.
yes, you have to be careful about your language. There are ways to skirt around it. There are ways to use certain language illustratively rather than aggressively. And it is like you said, it is about context. But I would always err on the side of caution. Um,
Yeah.
I've I've gotten into trouble in the past with certain things, and even it's usually things you don't expect is a thing that gets me. It's usually when you let your guard down, when you don't think about what you're saying sometimes, or when you don't understand the technicalities of what you could be saying. It's quite difficult for people to know what will and won't get them in trouble. I wouldn't say people should self-censor. I would never say that. But what people really should do is try and be mindful, and as your Substack will help people do, equip people to know what is and isn't beyond the line legally in certain situations.
Do you want me to go into that briefly?
Yes, do, because I've got the terrorism section up here, and you're right. A lot of these people either said the wrong thing or clicked on the wrong link. There's a couple of people
Yeah.
here who are in trouble simply for downloading things like the Anarchist Cookbook. So do go into that.
Right. British free speech law is primarily based on how you express it and politeness. So, in a lot of hate speech law and that type of thing, the Malicious Communications Act, a word grossly offensive is used. So, most people you will find in prison in the UK for being or saying stupid things, so Holocaust deniers, for example, are in prison not because they doubted that Holocaust happened, because they expressed it in a way that was particularly offensive. So you have that woman, I forget her name, who sang a song. It's not that she doesn't think the Holocaust happened that got her in prison. It's the fact that she sung a song about it. I'm not aware of anyone, at least since Tony Blair, who has been put in prison for writing academic works denying the Holocaust. I'm using the Holocaust denial because it's an extreme example.
Yeah, and it is one that is illegal in the abstract in parts of Europe, but not in Britain.
Yes. So another thing is incitement to violence, which I'm going to get onto later when we discuss certain defamatory elements. If you, and inciting racial hatred, but they're quite similar. If you incite people to do something, even in a joke, so jokes aren't a defense in the UK. Making a joke about stabbing someone or having someone assassinated, even if it's a joke, is not something you should be doing, because for libel law and for slander law in the UK, a joke isn't a defense. And it's the same, as far as I can tell, for things like malicious communication.
Yes, there's a reason we try and couch things in slightly more academic terms, and also use other sources to say things for us in what we do.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do is using what are considered safer mainstream sources to create a larger narrative, and that means that a lot of the stuff you're not directly saying yourself, you are referencing, which is one of the things that I try and do, from my perspective, to make sure it's not just you're right. It's a lot of it is a bit of a game of being polite, trying to be more serious, and trying to be slightly more academic with it, and also referencing what you're saying. I think it's a lot more difficult if you're simply using a source. Although I have there have been places. There was a very famous case with the girl who was put in prison for commenting like drill lyrics on an Instagram
Yeah.
post.
Poor thing.
So quoting rap lyrics is not a defense, even though it used to be a joke about
Yeah.
racism. It actually is not a defense quoting rap lyrics. So
Yeah, it's not. And I feel really sorry for that girl, because it's awful being
uh,
put in prison for something you say or put on Twitter.
there's another thing you notice though as well, which is just generally the report has not been proofread. You said when we had a quick discussion off air that you thought that the report itself hadn't been given a proper legal read through because of some of the possibly defamatory statements, but it also doesn't
Yes.
seem to have been given a copy read through either.
No, because there are spelling mistakes everywhere. There are incomplete sentences and just general bad grammar generally. I mean, most of the people who work for Hope Not Hate, as far as I'm aware, are quite well educated people. Don't some of them have PhDs, master's
Supposedly,
degrees?
yes. Yes, there are
Yes.
people who are supposedly professional researchers from an academic background.
I see. Okay, well, that's no. I'm dyslexic. I'm functionally illiterate. I dictate everything, and I wouldn't be making half the mistakes they've made in this report.
Now, I'm also dyslexic, and I tend to get people, sanity checks. You can read things backwards, read things on different colored backgrounds, which sometimes helps. It is very amateurish. We're not just making fun of their grammar, though. Here, the point here is that it doesn't seem to have been given a proper copy read, which also
Yes.
suggests it's probably also not been given a proper legal read.
Yeah,
Um,
because to give people a bit of context at how much it would cost to give something like this a proofread from a lawyer, you're probably talking about £300 an hour to £600 an hour, and it's 150 pages. It took me 3 hours to read the whole thing. So you're looking about £900, maybe more, maybe less. £900 at the low end, so it's probably going to be more than that.
Well, Hope Not Hate seems to have a lot of money to knock around. We talked about it during the stream, but they are an organization which spends nearly £1 million a year in terms of it basically spends everything it receives, and that generally seems to be in the 900k to £1 million range. So that isn't out of the realms of possibility for an organization.
No.
It's 13 people strong. It's not a large organization, but it's certainly a wealthy organization, and it is technically a charitable organization. So everything it spends a lot of it can technically be written off. They wouldn't be paying, say, VAT and a lot of things, and they'd be able to get possibly preferential rates on certain things, depending on who they know. One of the aspects I wanted to ask you about is we talked about the previous version of Hope Not Hate, Searchlight, being given a slap on the wrist by the Charity Commission. But what is your thoughts on how Hope Not Hate is able to remain as a charity? Because it does do some pretty nakedly political things.
Yes. So I'll oversimplify it for the audience, but charities essentially are prohibited from engaging in political activities that are not directly related to their charitable intentions. So if you've got a charity that is for the protection of elephants, it can engage in political activity related to banning the ivory trade and animal rights and that type of thing. Am I making sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Right. This issue is an issue that a lot of sensible centrists have because Alexander Adams, who is a brilliant man, I suggest you go by his books, has had some difficulty complaining about organizations that are funding and doing what would seem to be political activities. And the reason why art charities and even something like Hope Not Hate, in my opinion, gets away with it is because in the case of the art charities, to some extent, they're required to by law because if a charity is receiving public money, it normally will have the public sector equality duty, which
Yes.
an aspect of is to take action towards equality of outcome. So to some extent, especially in government bodies, affirmative action is perfectly legal in the UK.
Yes.
So that's how the art organisations, in my opinion, get away with any complaints that are made about their political activities because to some extent it's required by law and to some extent they're allowed to do it. They can make an argument about that. The second, for Hope Not Hate specifically, as far as I understand it, the charitable purpose of Hope Not Hate is to combat the far right and de-radicalise people. So a very good argument could be made by anybody representing Hope Not Hate that political campaigning against the far right or whatever is towards their charitable purpose.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether this argument would stand up or not, but the reason we haven't got anywhere is because we don't have the organized minority who can set up organizations that could deal with this stuff. I mean, I don't think money's as much the issue because from my own business experience in businesses that I've run, finding money, if you've got the people, isn't that difficult.
No, it's finding the people and getting the organization done. It's what I've always found. It's the same thing. To pivot quickly to a very quick shill, which I said in the beginning. It's the same thing we encounter with our Nomos events. It's the money isn't actually the issue. The money's there. We put up the deposits, and tickets generally sell out. We can get the money. It's organizing it, getting people involved, getting people to help out. It's the practical aspect of it. Once you've got over the initial hump of interest in getting stuff in place, is the harder aspect of it. By the way, Nomos Manchester 2, 26th and 27th of May. I've managed to get the plug in there. There'll be a proper promo video on the YouTube channel, but just letting people know because I've been having quite a few people asking about that. But yes, do go on.
I was talking about how organizations like Hope Not Hate can engage in political activities. So the reason they can get away with it is essentially because we aren't organized enough to do anything about it.
There could be a very good argument to make that they probably shouldn't have been given charitable status in the first place because they've basically been given charitable status to engage in political activity. I know it's a little bit of arguing with the regime to make the regime stop doing what they want to do, but you kind of have to have the legal argument, and they have to at least pretend that they are abiding by the law a lot of the time. I'd say it would be a worthwhile avenue, but I'm not. You're right. It's something that quite simply hasn't been tried properly, and I'd be interested to see if it was tried on a few of these, what the outcome would be. But you're right. A large part of it is just we don't have the organization of lawyers and we don't have that impetus in place. We don't have the strategy in place.
No,
Um,
I mean, implementing a multi-year legal strategy would take multiple people who are know what they're doing, first of all, because what I see a lot on the sensible centre and the right more broadly is people get involved in things they have no business or qualifications getting involved in.
yes, that is quite a problem.
Yes. So I do understand, and I probably agree with you to an extent, that Hope Not Hate's links to the government and institutions have probably helped it, whereas another charity or organisation that doesn't have those links would not have got away with some of the stuff Hope Not Hate has got away with. However, that said, judges in the UK and tribunals in the UK are pretty independent
Yes, they are. That
because we randomly select judges out of a pool of qualified people in the UK. And then out of those who are randomly selected, they go through intensive interviews. Becoming a judge in the UK is extremely difficult. And it's a completely qualifications based and in some cases random appointment process. Whereas in most other countries, judges are political appointees or they're directly elected.
yes, we do have one of the saving graces of the UK. It can be potluck is the fact that we do have a relatively independent judiciary. And you're right that you will get a judge from a pool. You do sometimes get activist judges. You do sometimes
Yes,
get, especially certain areas where they'll tap a certain magistrate they know. Maybe that it is open to fiddling, but the process as it's supposed to progress is supposed to be very, very resilient to political interference. So it is one
yes,
of the headaches that the British establishment still has, is that individual judges who are quite well positioned can make judgments that they don't like. That's part of why the Supreme Court was set up, to give kind of an appointed final line of defense for some of the stuff the government wants to do, because they're a lot more in control of things like the Supreme Court than they are of the lower courts, the magistrates' courts, the Crown courts, and the judiciary at large. You're right, are generally very independent. So it is something definitely worth pursuing.
yes. I mean, I'd argue a bit about the government having more control over the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court generally is quite good, in my opinion, from reading a lot of their judgments. The Supreme Court is pretty independent. I mean, the Supreme Court is appointed by a very similar process as your average judge.
It kind of exists in a different space, and it has
Yeah.
become a little bit of a political football. But on paper, yes, but in terms of the people who end up there is a lot more of a relationship between kind of the establishment and some of the very, very senior judiciary. But as you're pointing out, it's very difficult for the government to reach down and control individual judges. It's really up to the
Yes.
judge, especially in slightly more minor cases, which I get, which action against an NGO wouldn't be something that is headline news unless it was someone extremely powerful. So it is a lot more possible to get quote unquote fair judicial decisions here in the UK than it is in many places. So I'd say it's
Yes.
one of the more worthwhile things to try. One of the other things I want to ask you about, and I will stress, as I did, I think a little bit at the beginning, that this is not legal advice. We're not giving legal advice. If you want legal advice, go and actually pay a lawyer. We're just talking about legal aspects in the abstract. So we're legally covered there. We're legally covered there. That's my little disclaimer.
Yes.
But
Yes. Don't take anything I say as legal advice.
no, there's a little bit here about Britain First, and a lot of the organisations they talked about in the report are slightly defunct, I'll be honest. But a lot
Yeah.
of these sections here, it talks about Britain First, it talks about Tommy Robinson and a lot of different people and the people around him. Say if any of these people who were featured in this report thought that the information about them was untrue or was malicious in some way, what would be their recourse, and how do you differentiate between what is law breaking in terms of criminally and what is law breaking just in terms of tort. It's one of the things that I'm not as clued up on, and I know you are a lot more up on the distinction between those two. So that'd be my next question.
Right. If there's something in this report about someone that isn't true, the balance or the burden of proof is on hope not hate. So, for example, let's say, but can I use AA as an example?
Oh yes, of course.
If AA were to take legal action against Hope Not Hate would have to prove that he's a Nazi and a fascist, and also prove that he said what he apparently said in this report, which he says he didn't say. So
They've
that's what.
misattributed it, I believe, is what they've done. They've mixed it up. To be fair, a lot of their write up in him, apart from the first paragraph, was relatively neutral. But they did put a relatively extraordinary claim in there. But yeah, did go on.
Yeah, because so they'd have to prove it's true by having witnesses, the original recording, something like that. Libel is also a crime as well as a tort, but it hardly ever gets prosecuted as a crime because the police have better things to do with their time, so
Yeah.
we're told. So normally the difference between libel and as a crime as opposed to a tort is the standard is higher. So you've got to prove that something is untrue on the balance of probability, or is true if you're claiming something about someone on the balance of probability for a
Yes.
tort case. Whereas for a criminal case, it's backwards. So the prosecution have to prove, as far as I'm aware from the libel cases I've read that are criminal cases, that someone said something and that statement is untrue. So as a tort, the burden of proof is on the person who makes the statement to prove that it's true.
But yeah, as in a criminal case, obviously it's innocent.
It's the prosecution.
Yes.
But I'm not aware of that many libel cases as criminal cases because the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, don't have that much money. They're very under-resourced.
They wouldn't be able to prosecute all those cases. Okay, a quick thing as it's kind of a cap off I wanted to mention before we do another round of shilling is we talked about the aspect of hope not hate and all these different NGOs. They do exist in a bit of a grey area in which they are largely unchallenged from the outside because they are backed by nominally the regime, and the people who are against them tend to be outsiders without that much money or organization. But there's also kind of, as you talked about, the interpretation aspect, the anarcho-tyranny aspect, which is the fact that when they are reported, and when they are reported to something like the Charity Commission, or when they are, eventually taken to court, or if they have things go against them, generally they have a bit more of a generous view put on them than organizations that are counter to the current narrative. It's very clear that Hope Not Hate and many of the other, especially like the climate and immigration NGOs, exist really because people aren't willing to take action against them in many cases, or the Charity Commission isn't willing to take action against them. And there's quite a large amount of leeway. How grey are the rules around the action of charities, would you say?
It really does depend. I mean, that in some places they can be pretty grey, and in others they're quite clear. So, if we might go on to the topic of a charity acting politically, that's quite a grey area. But if you've got an area, I don't know, this is hypothetical. Let's say a charity has defrauded people or is committing a crime. Let's say they're engaged in human trafficking. That's not really a grey area. If it can be proven that a charity and members of that charity are committing crime, and the people in charge of that charity are aware of it, that charity will be in quite serious trouble. So there have been cases where charities have been liable is something else, for the actions of their members and have actually lost their charitable status for it. It happened a lot during the Savile era or the post-Savile era because lots of charities that were children's charities were found to have not been engaging in adequate due diligence on people they were allowing to work with the kids, and that led to some of the kids getting molested. So if a charity can be proven to be committing crime or turning a blind eye to it, then it's pretty cut and dry that charity is probably going to lose its charitable status, or at the very least, all its members or all the board members and people in positions of authority will just be cleared out.
Yes, it's a worthwhile vector. Like I said, I would use this kind of last little bit as an appeal to say if you're someone who is a legal professional or does have legal skills, do reach out. Reach out to me. Reach out to Evelyn, or reach out to people you think you could help. It's good to build networks, or reach out to fellow people who who are legal professionals who you might think have kind of the same ideas and the same principles as we do. It's very kind of nascent stage stuff. I talked in the No Moss event in London about the fact that one of the things that is most powerful that we like is lawfare. That's part of the why I want to do this stream. I want to highlight reactionary reading law. I will quickly, go over. He does have a Twitter. He does have his open oratory on locals. He is on Substack, on the Substack there. So do go track him down. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Reactionary Reading Law. Is there anything else
No problem.
you want to shill or say before we finish here?
I want to just point something out from the legal perspective in getting lawyers to make themselves known to us. Can be, that does happen. There are lawyers who do come to some of our events, but the issue is you've got an issue of bad behavior with people saying stupid things, which isn't that common at our events. But I was talking to someone who is a right-wing lawyer, and they're quite black-pilled because every time they go to an event, you have people saying stupid things and just behaving like absolute animals, and that puts people off. I should also make clear that lawyers can do pro bono work. However, most lawyers aren't really into doing pro bono work unless it's with an organization, because there are liability insurance issues with lawyers just taking cases on their own for someone else without organizational support, because some lawyers can do that and are regulated to do that, others are not. So it's much better if we're getting lawyers and any kind of financial professional, any professional who's got useful skills, we don't encourage them to do things that will affect their career or affect their livelihood without being able to support them.
Yes, of course. It's more in the aspect of trying to build up that kind of legal body and work out who does have certain skills rather than trying to.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do these kind of things in private, which is why I try and encourage that kind of organization. I think that's the most useful thing we can do right now. But again, thank you guys for coming. Do drop a like. If you're listening to this in Substack, do subscribe so you'll get these regularly. We do our streams on Monday and Wednesday, and generally we put things out on Tuesday and Thursday on Substack as we're able to. We've got quite a long content pipeline, so we've got a few things stacked up. But I hope you enjoyed this, and goodbye.